the universe had forgotten humanity. When the last of Earth's defenders fell, humanity's place in the cosmos seemed sealed. The massive alien fleets had descended like locusts, ravaging planets, wiping out any sign of human civilization across the galaxy. The unification of the Stellar Dominion, the vast alien empire, had crushed the fledgling resistance in one brutal stroke. But humanity didn't know how to give up. Not like that. Not while there was one person left to fight. There was still one star in the blackness of space that belonged to them, and they weren't about to let it fade. The war had started decades ago, with the Dominion's invasion of Earth. At first, the humans fought back with what little they had, outdated ships, makeshift weapons, and the raw instinct to survive. They were outmatched. Outclassed. And yet, when it seemed all hope was lost, the unthinkable happened. A group of rogue scientists, engineers, and war veterans stumbled upon the remnants of an ancient alien technology hidden deep beneath Earth's surface. It was a miracle, an unclaimed relic from the pre-Dominion age, a piece of history untouched by the Dominion's expansion. And it was enough to turn the tide. They called it the Genesis engine. The engine was a relic of a long-lost alien race, capable of creating vast pockets of space where the laws of physics bent to the will of the human mind. In its wake, new planets could be terraformed in the blink of an eye, and the balance of power in the galaxy could be reshaped. It was their last hope, their only hope. At the head of the operation was Commander Isha Ren, a name that had become a symbol of human resilience in the face of annihilation. She was as much legend as leader. Once, she was an unassuming officer in Earth's naval forces, a quiet presence in a vast bureaucracy. Now, she commanded the remains of humanity's greatest weapon in the war for their survival. For years, the fleet had been in hiding, the remnants of humanity scattered across the fringes of the galaxy. There was no home anymore, no unified world to return to. Only the cold, endless expanse. Yet Isha had a plan, a risky, impossible plan, and she was willing to do anything to see it succeed. It would take everything the humans had left. The first time she laid eyes on the Genesis engine, she was struck by the sheer beauty of it. It was a massive, crystalline structure, impossibly sleek and alien in design. It hummed with a quiet power, like a sleeping giant waiting to wake. And the moment it activated, everything changed. The stars flickered, shifting positions, and realities seemed to shimmer around them. The air tasted different. She stepped back, studying the machine. She couldn't afford mistakes, not now. The Dominion would be hunting for them, and they had no more room for failure. "We don't get to be afraid anymore," Isha muttered under her breath. A voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Captain Darius Rain, her right-hand officer and the best pilot she had. He was standing at the entrance to the command deck, hands clenched behind his back as always. "Commander, the Dominion fleet is inbound. We've got maybe 6 hours before they reach our position." Isha's heart sank, but she didn't let it show. They had no choice but to fight. The Genesis engine would have to be their last gamble, their final card. "Prepare the fleet," she ordered. "We've been running long enough. It's time to stand our ground." The plan was simple: deploy the Genesis engine and initiate a final assault on the Dominion's core worlds. If the engine could create a new star system, one that was both safe and powerful, it would give them a base from which they could rebuild. But every good plan had its risks. And the risks for this one were enormous. Even if they succeeded, there was no guarantee that the Dominion wouldn't wipe them out the moment they stepped into their new territory. But Isha's resolve was absolute. She had seen too much suffering, too many deaths, to turn back now. Her people deserved a future. As the fleet mobilized, the crew worked in tense silence, knowing the stakes. The final battle was about to begin, and no one could predict what would happen once the first shots were fired. But as Isha stared out the observation window into the vast expanse of space, she couldn't shake the feeling that something much bigger was at play here. The stars themselves seemed to be watching, waiting. Whether it was fate or something more, she didn't know. All she knew was that humanity wasn't done yet. And they never would be. The Dominion fleet was relentless, their ships cutting through space like blades of ice, cold and merciless. They had no real concept of mercy, no understanding of what it meant to be a species hanging by a thread. To them, humanity had always been little more than a nuisance, a spark in the dark that would soon be snuffed out. But they underestimated humanity. And they underestimated Isha Ren. The Genesis engine, now fully activated, shimmered with a radiant blue light, pulsating like the heartbeat of a new world yet to be born. It was humanity's last hope, and as Isha watched its core flicker to life, she could feel the weight of the universe pressing down on her shoulders. This wasn't just about survival, it was about proving to the stars that humanity would not fade quietly into the void. "Commander," Captain Rain's voice crackled over the comms, "we're locked in. The Dominion ships are just within range." Isha took a slow breath, her fingers brushing against the cold metal of the console. She'd always been calm under pressure, but this was different. This time, everything she had fought for, everything she had sacrificed, was about to be put to the test. "Prepare the fleet," she ordered, her voice unwavering. "We fight here. We fight now. There will be no retreat." The fleet, what was left of it, was a ragtag collection of salvaged ships, patched together from the debris of past battles. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Each vessel was packed with weapons, fighters, and soldiers ready to lay down their lives if it meant giving humanity a chance to live. They were willing to die, but not without a fight. Isha's eyes narrowed as she turned to Rain. "Launch the first wave. Full barrage." The command was given, and in a synchronized movement, hundreds of small ships tore from their docking bays, streaking into the blackness of space. They were fast, agile, and deadly. The Dominion ships loomed ahead, their massive forms dominating the battlefield. The two fleets collided with a deafening silence, the chaos of the war unfolding in the cold expanse of the galaxy. The first wave of fighters unleashed a barrage of missiles, exploding against the Dominion ships in a flurry of light. But the Dominion was prepared. Their ships retaliated with precise laser beams, cutting through the air like knives. Isha's fleet was outnumbered, but the human spirit was unyielding. The first wave of fighters engaged the enemy head-on, diving through the Dominion defenses with reckless abandon. It wasn't enough. As the first wave was obliterated, Isha knew they couldn't win with sheer firepower alone. This wasn't a battle of strength, it was a battle of endurance. They had to hold the line long enough for the Genesis engine to work. "Captain Rain," Isha barked, "give me the status on the engine. We don't have much time." Rain's face appeared on the holoscreen, sweat dripping down his forehead. "The engine is primed, but the power draw is huge. We need more time to fully stabilize the coordinates. I'm not sure we'll have it before the Dominion reaches us." "Then we make sure they don't reach us," Isha replied, her voice sharp as a blade. "Start the second wave. Lock onto their flagships, and don't hold back." As the second wave of fighters launched, Isha felt a surge of adrenaline. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and the odds were slim. But humanity's greatest strength had always been its refusal to give up. There was something in their blood, something that couldn't be defeated by firepower or technology. It was the will to fight, to survive, and above all, the belief that tomorrow could always be better than today. The battle raged on, and the Genesis engine continued to hum beneath Isha's command. Each moment was a test. With every shot fired, with every ship that fell, humanity was getting closer to reclaiming the stars. But the Dominion was nothing if not ruthless, and they were closing in fast. "Commander, we've lost contact with the eastern flank," Rain reported. "They're being overrun." Isha's fists clenched. The situation was deteriorating faster than she had anticipated. The Dominion was adapting to their tactics, and the humans were starting to buckle under the pressure. Their resolve was strong, but the constant wave of Dominion forces threatened to crush them. "We hold, or we die," Isha whispered under her breath, but loud enough for her officers to hear. "Deploy the final wave. Now." The remaining fighters launched in a final desperate push. It was clear now that they weren't just trying to win, They were trying to survive long enough for the Genesis engine to reach full potential. And then, amid the fire and chaos, Isha saw it, a flash of light in the distance. The Genesis engine's pulse was beginning to spread. A ripple formed in the fabric of space itself. It was working. But the victory, however small, would come at a cost. And Isha knew that before the day was over, more blood would be spilled. The sky was on fire. The final wave of humanity's fleet tore through space, their fighters streaking past explosions and laser beams as they collided with the Dominion's relentless onslaught. Commander Isha Ren stood at the heart of the battle, her hands clenched around the console, eyes scanning the war zone around them. The sight was both beautiful and horrifying, a cacophony of chaos, a brilliant display of destruction. The Genesis engine had begun to stabilize its coordinates, a crackling energy field enveloping the battlefield as space itself seemed to warp and twist. The massive ripples in reality grew in size, and Isha could feel the faint pulse through her bones, something primal, something ancient. It was working. But at what cost? She watched as one of her destroyers, a hulking beast of metal, was torn in half by a Dominion warship. The explosion rippled through the void, followed by the sudden disappearance of another wave of fighters that had been pinned down by heavy fire. The ships kept coming, relentless, crushing anything that moved. Humanity was hanging on by a thread, but Isha wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. We're taking heavy casualties, Commander. Rain's voice came over the comms, the panic evident even in his usual calm tone. Our fighters can't hold out much longer. We need to fall back. No, Isha cut him off sharply. We hold our position. The Genesis engine needs more time. The only way we win this is if we stay the course. Her gaze hardened. The lives lost here today, every sacrifice, had to mean something. If the Genesis engine could create a new future for humanity, it would be worth it. But only if they survived long enough to reach that moment. Another blast shook the ship, knocking Isha off balance for a moment. She caught herself on the console, breathing heavily, her chest tightening as the lights flickered overhead. It felt like the walls were closing in on them, like time itself was speeding up. On the command deck, officers scrambled to maintain control of the fleet, sending out distress signals to the remnants of the scattered human ships that were still fighting. The air was thick with tension and fear. But Isha's mind was focused only on one thing, the engine. She couldn't afford distractions. We've lost more than half the fleet, Commander, Rain said, his voice quieter now. If we don't pull out... Not yet, she interrupted again, her voice firm. The engine is almost there. We have to buy it more time. Time. Humanity was running out of it. Isha glanced out at the war unfolding, the dark, unfeeling expanse of space around them. Each explosion marked the end of another life, another soldier, another dream of a future. It didn't matter how many ships the Dominion sent, humanity would rise again. It had to. They had come too far, endured too much to be erased now. And then, as if in response to her thoughts, the unexpected happened. A massive shockwave pulsed through the fleet, sending ripples of light through the air. The Genesis engine flared brighter than ever before, its power growing exponentially. The gravitational field surrounding it began to twist violently, pulling in nearby debris, asteroids, and even Dominion warships. The stars themselves seemed to shudder in the wake of the engine's raw energy. Isha's heart raced. The engine was doing it, it was destabilizing the fabric of space, preparing for a new reality. A reality where humanity might just survive. But then, another, far darker presence made itself known. The Dominion flagship, a towering monstrosity of sleek black armor, loomed ominously at the edge of the battle. Its hull was massive, nearly impervious to the human fleet's firepower. But what really sent a chill down Isha's spine wasn't its size. It was the figure standing in the bridge of the ship. A towering alien, unmistakably Dominion, with cold, piercing eyes that seemed to see straight through Isha's soul. He was no ordinary soldier. This was General Aarnath, one of the Dominion's highest-ranking officers, a tactician and a killer. His reputation was legendary among the humans who had fought against the Dominion for years. And now, it seemed, he had come to personally oversee humanity's destruction. "This is it," Rain muttered, watching the flagship's movements from the tactical display. "If he gets any closer, we're done for." Isha swallowed hard. The battle had become personal. This wasn't just about survival, it was about proving that humanity wasn't just a passing anomaly in the cosmos. They were a force to be reckoned with. "Then we make him regret ever stepping foot in our galaxy," she said, her voice low and determined. The crew exchanged glances, but no one flinched. They had no choice now. They were in this until the end. With a surge of energy, Isha ordered the remaining fleet ships to converge on the Dominion flagship. It was a suicide mission, but it was the only one they had left. They had to take down General Aarnath if they had any hope of stalling the incoming onslaught. As her fleet launched toward the flagship, Isha stood at the center of it all, her hands gripping the command chair. For a fleeting moment, she wondered if it was worth it, if any of it was worth it. Then she looked out at the stars, knowing they were humanity's birthright. No, they weren't done yet. And as the human fleet surged toward the enemy, with the Genesis engine pulsing like the last beacon of hope, Isha knew one thing for certain: humanity would not go quietly into the dark. They would burn. They would bleed. And they would rise again. General Aarnath's flagship loomed above the battlefield like a shadow that could not be outrun. Its sleek, black hull gleamed with an otherworldly menace, reflecting the chaos of the war below. The Dominion's warships, like an endless tide, surged around it, closing in on the remnants of humanity's fleet. Isha Ren stood at the helm, watching the display with cold precision. The fleet was down to a handful of ships, old, battered, and scarred from years of relentless conflict, but they were hers, and they weren't going down without a fight. "Commander," Rain said, his voice hoarse, "the last of the fighters are on their way to engage the flagship. The engine's energy output is off the charts, but it's not fully stabilized yet. We can't wait any longer. If we don't push now, the Genesis engine could collapse on itself. We'll lose everything." "I know," Isha muttered, her eyes fixed on the Dominion flagship. The monstrous ship was moving toward them, slowly, deliberately, as if to savor the moment of their inevitable defeat. But Isha wasn't going to make it easy for them. She turned to Rain. "Prepare the ship for a direct assault. All remaining power to the forward shields and weapons. We're going in." Rain's eyes flickered with doubt, but he didn't hesitate. "Understood." The command deck fell silent as the crew prepared for the final charge. The air was thick with the weight of what was about to happen. There was no turning back. Isha knew that by the end of this battle, the fate of humanity would be decided, one way or another. Outside, the last wave of human fighters closed in on the flagship, a final desperate attempt to stall the Dominion's advance. The fighters darted through the void, launching everything they had: missiles, plasma bursts, everything they could spare. But the Dominion flagship didn't flinch. It absorbed the blows with impunity, its hull almost impervious to the onslaught. A few fighters managed to slip past its defenses, engaging the smaller Dominion vessels that had followed in its wake. There were no grand victories to be had, no miracle waiting in the wings, just the cold, brutal reality that they were all fighting for a future that seemed increasingly unlikely. Isha clenched her fists, her jaw tight with determination. This was the moment. If the Genesis engine could be fully activated, it would create a new world, a sanctuary, somewhere far away from the Dominion's reach. But there was a catch: they had to fight until the very last second to buy it the time it needed. The first shot rang out from the Dominion flagship. It struck one of the surviving human ships, disintegrating it in a flash of light. The explosion sent a shockwave through the fleet, knocking the remaining ships off course. A wave of panic rippled through the crew, but Isha forced herself to focus. She couldn't afford hesitation, not now. "Full speed ahead," she commanded. "Target the flagship's core. We need to hit them where it hurts." The human fleet surged forward, their ships plunging into the heart of the Dominion's forces. The roar of weapons fire was deafening as Isha's vessel tore through the battlefield, dodging blasts and engaging Dominion ships one after another. Their shields flared under the barrage, but they held. Just barely. The ship's hull groaned with each impact, and the crew fought to maintain control. Isha gritted her teeth, focusing entirely on the mission. They were close now. The Genesis engine was almost ready. She could feel it, deep in her bones. This was humanity's last shot. And then, as if summoned by the desperate resolve in Isha's heart, the impossible happened. The Genesis engine exploded with light. It wasn't just a flash, it was as if the very fabric of the universe had been rewritten. Reality seemed to bend and twist, and for a fleeting moment, the universe held its breath. The stars themselves seemed to flicker out of existence, replaced by an immense surge of energy that expanded outward in all directions. Isha's eyes widened as the power of the Genesis engine began to spread through space, creating a swirling vortex of light and shadow. It wasn't a new star, at least not yet, but a rift in space and time itself, a wound in the fabric of reality that was pulling everything toward it. The Dominion flagship, caught in the vortex, began to shudder, its massive hull groaning under the strain. "We've done it," Rain whispered, almost in disbelief. But it wasn't over. Not yet. As the massive rift grew, it consumed everything in its path, the Dominion ships, the debris, even the very light of the stars that had once been part of their universe. But in the center of the vortex, humanity's fleet stood firm. The final moments of the battle were a blur of blinding light and distortion. The flagship, General Aarnatha's ship, was torn apart by the energy of the Genesis engine. Pieces of it shattered and were sucked into the expanding rift, leaving nothing but the void. And with it, the presence of the Dominion's greatest commander was erased from existence. But that wasn't the true victory. As the rift continued to expand, a new star, bright, shining, and impossibly close, began to form at the heart of it. The Genesis engine was doing what it was meant to do, it was creating the future humanity had fought for. A future beyond the reach of the Dominion. The vortex began to collapse in on itself, but the human fleet was already pulling away, retreating into the newly formed system. They had survived. Humanity had not only held its ground but had reclaimed their place among the stars. Isha stared at the new star, her heart racing. They had won. But it had come at an unimaginable cost. Rain approached her, his face a mix of exhaustion and relief. "We did it. We're alive." Isha nodded, her gaze never leaving the brilliant light of the new star. "We're alive. And we're free." But as the remnants of the fleet made their way to the new star system, Isha couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. A new war, a new fight, was inevitable. The universe would never leave them alone. But this time, humanity would be ready. And this time, they wouldn't just survive. They would conquer. The new star in the heart of the rift bathed the human fleet in a radiant, otherworldly glow. It was a symbol of survival, a beacon in the darkest void. As humanity's shattered remnants navigated their way toward the formation of their new home, the weight of the battle still clung to Isha like a thick fog. She stood in the command deck of the flagship, her hands pressed against the cold metal of the console, staring out at the growing formation of planets that would soon be theirs. "Commander," Rain's voice cut through the silence, "we've lost contact with the rest of the fleet. Some of the ships are still gathering around the new star, but we're spread too thin." Isha didn't respond immediately. The silence in her chest was deafening. They had made it. They had reclaimed the stars. But at what cost? The dead, the broken, the ones who would never make it to this new world, they were the ghosts that haunted her mind now. "Commander, do you hear me?" Rain's voice was sharp with concern. "Yes," she said finally, her voice a little more fragile than she intended. She straightened up, pushing aside the weight of her thoughts. "Send out a distress signal. We need to regroup. We can't afford to be divided now. We rebuild from here." Rain nodded and turned away to relay the orders. Isha stood alone for a moment, her fingers tracing the screen in front of her. The glow of the new star reflected in her eyes, and she felt a rush of pride. Humanity had made it. They had fought, bled, and clawed their way out of the abyss. But the stars they had just won were not a guarantee of peace. They had no idea what would come next. As the fleet regrouped, a strange unease began to settle in her stomach. It was like the universe was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And then it did. "Commander." Rain's voice returned, louder now, filled with urgency. "You need to see this." Isha's breath caught in her throat as she moved toward the tactical station. A display of the galaxy lit up in front of her, every fleet, every known planet, every known threat. And in the distance, just at the edge of the systems they had just claimed, a new presence emerged. "Is that?" Isha's voice faltered. "Yes," Rain confirmed grimly. "Another Dominion fleet. A massive one." It was too large to ignore, a formation so vast that it appeared like a new constellation in the sky. 100 warships, easily, and more beyond that. They were coming. The Dominion was not content to leave humanity to its fate. They were coming to wipe them out, and this time, they would not be underprepared. Isha clenched her fists. "How far out are they?" "About a week," Rain replied. "We can't get enough ships together in time to form any meaningful defense." Isha's heart raced, but she didn't let panic set in. "We hold the line. We prepare the defenses. Whatever they send, we fight." "The Genesis engine, Commander," Rain began carefully. "We've only just tapped into its potential. What if they come at us with everything they have? Are we prepared to deal with another war on the scale?" Isha paused, her mind racing. The Genesis engine had given them the stars, but it had also drained their resources. Their fleet was already a patchwork, and they couldn't rely on it to win another war. "Not yet. I won't let them destroy what we've just won," she said quietly. Her voice was steel. "They want war. We'll give them one." Isha turned and walked to the command center, her gaze sweeping over the officers who had fought beside her. "We need to be ready for them. Every man, every woman, every ship. We use everything we have. The Genesis engine isn't just a tool, it's our weapon. If we can harness it fully, it can change the course of this battle." Rain's eyes flickered with doubt. "We've only just begun to understand its full power. It could go beyond what we expect. We've barely scratched the surface." "I know," Isha said, looking back at the glowing star. "But we don't have time. We use it, or we risk being wiped out before we have the chance to stand on our own 2 feet." The officers exchanged nervous glances, but there was no question. They had fought through impossible odds before. They would do it again. For the future. For their children. For everything they had lost. The weeks that followed were spent preparing. The fleet's remaining ships were reforged and rebuilt, their weapons upgraded with everything they could scrounge from the wreckage of the previous battles. The soldiers trained harder, pushing themselves to the limit, because they knew what was coming. The Dominion would not stop. They never did. Isha spent every waking moment in the command center, studying the Genesis engine's data, seeking any advantage they could exploit. The deeper they dug, the more they realized that the engine was more than just a weapon, it was a way of reshaping reality itself. Space, time, energy, they were all malleable in its presence. It could bend the very laws of nature, but its cost was steep. Every use took a toll on the human body, the ships, and the very fabric of space. By the time the Dominion fleet arrived in their star system, Isha was ready. She stood on the command deck, her expression steely, her heart unwavering. They would fight. They would burn their last breath into the sky if they had to. "Deploy the fleet," she ordered. Her hands were steady, her voice clear. There was no room for doubt, no time for fear. As the massive Dominion fleet entered their system, her fleet launched in perfect synchrony, each ship a symbol of humanity's relentless spirit. And as the first shot rang out, Isha Ren knew that this fight would define them. Not just as survivors. Not just as conquerors. But as something far greater. They would be the masters of their own destiny. They would be humanity, and they would not be erased. The battlefield stretched out before them like an endless canvas of destruction. The massive Dominion fleet had arrived, its warships forming a dark wall on the horizon, looming closer with each passing second. The human fleet, ragtag and battered, stood ready, outnumbered but not outmatched. Isha Ren stood in front of the command chair, her hands pressed into the cold metal, her gaze unblinking as she stared into the vastness of space. The battle had already begun. The first salvo had been fired, a burst of plasma that lit up the dark void like the flickering of dying stars. Humanity's ships, stripped, reinforced, and brimming with the last of their strength, charged forward. Isha had known this moment was coming. The Dominion, in their arrogance, could never let humanity stand free. They would fight to the bitter end to reclaim the galaxy. But humanity had something the Dominion could never understand. Something they could never defeat. "Commander, we're being overwhelmed on the left flank." Rain's voice crackled through the comms. "We can't hold them back much longer. The Genesis engine's output is destabilizing." "I know," Isha interrupted. "But we hold. We don't retreat, not this time." The rift in space, the new star humanity had claimed, glowed bright and steady in the distance, a symbol of their struggle, but also their only chance. The Genesis engine was humanity's last, greatest weapon, but every time it was used, it stretched reality a little further. Time was against them. A massive explosion rocked the ship, throwing Isha to the floor. The deck shuddered beneath her as sparks erupted from the console, and she felt the bite of heat against her skin. She pushed herself up, gritting her teeth. The enemy was relentless. Each wave of attack seemed more powerful than the last. "Commander." Rain's voice was urgent again. "If we don't withdraw the fleet, we'll lose everything." Isha's eyes narrowed. She had seen that same look in his eyes before, the one that spoke of defeat, of surrender. But she refused to let that happen. Not now. Not after everything they had fought for. "No," she said firmly. "We're not going anywhere. The Genesis engine will give us an edge. But we have to make it last. All ships, fire on their lead vessel. I want everything we've got." There was no hesitation in her voice. Not this time. Humanity had been backed into corners before, but they had survived. And they would survive again. The remaining fleet launched forward, weapons blazing. Each ship discharged plasma, missiles, and energy bolts with ferocity, streaking across the black expanse. The Dominion fleet retaliated in kind, unleashing wave after wave of firepower. The noise was deafening in the comms, a cacophony of destruction as ships were torn apart, splintered by explosions. The void swallowed everything, the dead, the dying, and the burning wreckage. Through the chaos, Isha saw the massive Dominion warship that led the assault. It was monstrous, a leviathan of destruction. Its black surface was punctuated by sharp, jagged edges, and it radiated power. The flagship. General Aarnatha's legacy. And it was coming for her. "Rain, get me targeting coordinates on that ship." "Now," Isha ordered. Her pulse was steady, her mind clear. This was their moment. This was the final gamble. Within seconds, the tactical display lit up with a beam of red light, tracing a path to the flagship's core. "Coordinates locked, Commander. Ready on your mark." Isha stared at the image, her hand hovering over the console. The Genesis engine was still humming, its energy feeding into the fleet's weapons. They had one shot, one chance to take down the flagship before the Dominion could wipe them all out. "Isha, the Genesis engine," Rain warned. "We're pushing it to its limit. If we push any further." "Do it," Isha said, her voice unwavering. Without another word, Rain gave the order. The fleet's remaining firepower surged, concentrated into one final volley. A blinding beam of energy shot toward the Dominion flagship, slamming into its shields with such force that the entire ship shuddered. The impact sent a shockwave through the battlefield, rattling both human and Dominion ships. The flagship's shields flickered, then failed. The core of the ship was exposed. Isha's breath caught in her throat as the fleet's weapons recharged for the final assault. This was their moment. Everything depended on this strike. Fire, Isha said. Now. The Genesis engine's energy poured into the weapons systems, and humanity's fleet fired everything they had. The laser beams, missiles, and plasma all converged on the exposed heart of the Dominion flagship. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a shattering explosion rocked the battlefield. The Dominion flagship erupted into a fireball of twisted metal and scorched debris. The shockwave reverberated through space, and for a heartbeat, the universe seemed to hold its breath. The human fleet stopped. The firing ceased. Everything went still. Isha held her breath, staring at the growing cloud of destruction where the flagship had once stood. It was gone. Destroyed. But even as the fleet celebrated this victory, Isha knew they hadn't won the war yet. The Dominion fleet didn't stop. The remaining ships began to regroup, forming a new line of defense. They would retaliate, and they would do it with fury. This battle was far from over. Rain, get us to the edge of the system. We need to buy time for the Genesis engine to recharge, Isha ordered. We can't risk using it again until we're sure it won't backfire. The tactical display flickered as the fleet began its retreat, pulling away from the battle at the outer edge of the new star system. Isha stood at the command chair, watching as the remnants of their forces pulled back into formation. The Dominion might have lost their flagship, but they hadn't lost their will to fight. This wasn't over. But Isha Ren, standing firm in the heart of humanity's fleet, wasn't about to let them take what they had earned. Not now. Not ever. The battle had only just begun. And humanity would see it through to the end. The universe had become a battlefield. After the destruction of the Dominion flagship, there was no longer any question. The Dominion would not rest. They would not surrender. But neither would humanity. Isha Ren stood at the command center of the flagship, staring at the holographic display of the battlefield. The remaining Dominion fleet had regrouped, their numbers still formidable despite the loss of their greatest ship. Humanity's forces, though smaller, were determined, and they had one advantage that no one else had, the Genesis engine. However, the toll of using it had not gone unnoticed. The energy required to use the engine was immense. Every time it was fired, reality itself seemed to tremble. Space distorted. Time wavered. Humanity's ships were starting to show signs of strain, their hulls shuddering under the intense energy. The Genesis engine had given them the power to survive, perhaps to win, but it was slowly eating away at the very foundation of their reality. Commander, Rain's voice broke through her thoughts. The Dominion's making a final push. They're converging on our position. We have less than an hour. Isha's heart pounded in her chest. Time was running out. The battle was coming to its inevitable end. But the more she looked at the map, the more she saw an opportunity. Humanity's fleet wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. We can't run, Rain, Isha said, her voice steady, though her thoughts raced. We need to hit them hard. If we can drive them back long enough, we can make it to the rift's edge. That's where the Genesis engine will be at full power. We use it one last time, not just as a weapon, but to change the tide of the war once and for all. Rain hesitated. He could see the risk. The last time the engine had been used, it had pushed their limits. There was no telling what it would do now. But he could see the resolve in Isha's eyes. There was no stopping her. We'll need to pull every remaining ship into the final strike, Rain said, his voice resolute. Every man and woman aboard will have to give everything. No exceptions. I know, Isha replied. And we will. The command deck was a flurry of activity as the fleet prepared for their final stand. Ships that had been limping, barely holding together, rallied one last time. The surviving soldiers took their positions, their expressions grim but determined. The officers coordinated, weapons primed and ready. The Genesis engine hummed, its energy beginning to charge, slowly at first, but with a growing intensity. As the Dominion fleet advanced, Isha could feel the weight of every life in the fleet. Every soldier, every officer, every civilian who had joined the war effort. They were all counting on this. There was no retreat. There was no going back. Launch all remaining fighters, Isha commanded. We go down fighting. The massive ships of humanity's fleet surged forward, their hulls glowing with energy as they launched a final offensive. The remaining fighters zoomed past, cutting through the Dominion ships with precision. Plasma fire, missiles, and bolts of energy erupted from every angle, tearing through the darkness. The Dominion fleet responded in kind, launching their own barrage, but the human fleet was relentless. Each strike was a testament to their resilience, their unwillingness to bend to the will of the Dominion. For a brief moment, it felt as if time itself had frozen. Isha watched as humanity's fleet collided with the Dominion's, a great clash of light and darkness. The shockwaves rippled through space, sending debris and shattered ships flying in every direction. The remnants of humanity's fleet fought tooth and nail, knowing that if they failed, there would be no second chance. And then, the Genesis engine activated once more. The ship groaned as the immense power surged through its systems. Isha could feel the ship's hull shake as the energy reached critical levels. The lights in the command center flickered, and Rain gripped his console as the very fabric of space seemed to bend under the strain. The stars themselves dimmed for a brief moment, as if holding their breath, before the light of the engine surged outward. A massive pulse of energy erupted from the engine, cutting through the Dominion fleet with the force of 1,000 suns. The shockwave sent smaller ships careening off course, their shields buckling under the intensity of the blast. The center of the pulse was aimed directly at the Dominion flagship, a direct strike that would change everything. The explosion was beyond anything Isha had ever witnessed. It was not just a detonation of energy. It was a rupture in reality itself. The very fabric of space trembled as the Genesis engine tore through the heart of the Dominion's forces. Ships, structures, and even time itself seemed to warp under the pressure. For a moment, the universe hung in a state of suspended animation, and then everything, absolutely everything, erupted into a blinding explosion of light. When the light faded, there was silence. The Dominion fleet was gone. Not a single ship remained. The flagship, once a symbol of their power, had been reduced to nothing more than a pile of twisted debris. The battlefield was empty. Quiet. Isha stood frozen in the aftermath, her mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. The Genesis engine had done it. It had destroyed the Dominion fleet, destroyed the threat once and for all. Humanity had won. Against all odds. Against all reason. They had emerged victorious. But as the dust settled, the truth hit her hard. The Genesis engine had done its job. It had torn through the very fabric of reality. Space and time would never be the same again. The universe was forever altered, and the cost of their victory was heavy. Isha took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the remaining fleet. The survivors. They had made it. But the future would be different now. They had won their freedom, but the road ahead would be one they would have to carve themselves. We did it, Rain said softly, standing beside her. His voice carried both exhaustion and awe. We really did it. Isha nodded, her eyes fixed on the swirling remnants of space where the Dominion fleet had once stood. The stars shone brightly once more, but this time, it was humanity's light. Yes, she whispered. We did. And now we take our place among the stars. Humanity had reclaimed the stars, but their journey had only just begun. The universe was vast, filled with both unknowns and possibilities. They had fought for their freedom, and now, with blood, sweat, and stubborn hope, they would build a future of their own. And this time, they would make sure it was a future they could hold, a future they could shape. With their victory, they had earned it.